everybody, to this Thomas Westcott podcast, one of a series that we are doing to explain what we do, how we help clients, and to highlight specific areas where we can add value. Today we're talking about pensions and retirement planning for business owners. I'm Iain Andrews. I'm a chartered financial planner. I've worked in financial planning now for over 25 years. I'm a partner here at Thomas Westcott, where I've had the privilege of spending the last 10 years. Thomas Westcott has a team of financial planners, and whilst we're all qualified and experienced in a broad range of advice, we also specialise in certain areas that reflect our experience, our qualifications, and the needs of the clients that we work with. I'm joined today by Andrew Brown, one of my fellow partners at Thomas Westcott, and one of the few people I know who's worked in financial planning for longer than me. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, Ian.
Andrew, so you've spent over 35 years now in financial planning, and for much of that time you've worked predominantly with business owners. We receive a very high volume of inquiries from business owners about pensions and retirement planning, probably understandably, but we've noticed a real increase in inquiries recently. Why do you think that is?
I think it's a number of reasons, but probably the biggest one is that they've cottoned on to the opportunities that the new pension freedoms have brought in. Haven't been around that long, really. 2015 they came in, and essentially what they did was two things. Firstly, giving much greater freedom on how and when to take pension benefits, and secondly, giving much more freedom to pass pension benefits on to other family members. And I think sort of all of a sudden, with the complication that always ran through pensions having largely fallen away, people have become much more interested. So they're always looking to us for help and guidance on how to extract profit from their business tax efficiently. And I think until very, very recently, pensions were just too complicated to contemplate. But with the new rules having come in, there's an opportunity to look at them with a fresh pair of eyes. And increasingly, business owners are looking at them and saying, is this something I should be doing? Have I got existing arrangements I need to be looking at? Can I make use of them? Where do I start? What do I do?
So the range of options that people have with their pensions when they actually get to retirement is much, much broader than it used to be. And I remember what seems like only yesterday, you basically had two options, but now it's much, much more complex and people really do need advice.
They do indeed. I mean, it's much, much more flexible in that there are no restrictions, but you are right. The other thing to remember about pensions is that when you make decisions, they are irrevocable. So if you get it wrong, if you don't take advice at the appropriate time and you get something wrong, it's actually pretty difficult to unravel it.
Okay, well, perhaps it might help our listeners if you explain a bit about how you start the process of advising business owners when it comes to planning their retirement.
Yeah, I mean, apart from kind of just making them more familiar with the basic terminology and the basic options that they have for extracting value from their business and building it up within pension funds tax efficiently, we generally start by looking at where they are, what they have at the moment. So in other words, what pre-existing pension arrangements they have, if any. Sometimes they're very elderly, sometimes they're more recent, sometimes they're workplace pension arrangements, sometimes they have absolutely nothing. But particularly where they have existing arrangements, we're looking to see whether those arrangements are fit for purpose. In other words, whether they need updating or whether they have something about them that is valuable, that means that they should be keeping them. And sometimes it's a mixture of both. It's not uncommon for business owners to have 4 or 5 different pension arrangements. It takes us a while to get the information that we need, but once we have that, we can then set it all out in front of them and saying, right, this is exactly what you have. These are the pros and cons of each of the arrangements. And given what you've told us you want to do, these are the steps that you need to take to enhance those pensions to allow you to do what you want to do. So that's really the starting point, finding out what they've got and also seeing if there's scope for them to make contributions based on the relief that was available in previous years that they didn't utilise. There's lots and lots of different things, but that's where we start.
And that's one area that I think where the legislation has increased the complexity, the carry forward reliefs, the annual allowance. Perhaps it would be helpful for our listeners if you explain a little bit more about how that works.
Yes, the areas where we most commonly get asked to help and explain, as you rightly say, carry forward, annual allowance and the lifetime allowance. And essentially what you've got an ability, if you haven't used up the maximum allowances in each individual tax year, to make up for lost time, to essentially make contributions that you could have made in previous tax years and benefit from the tax relief, be it a reduction to corporation tax or personal income tax relief if it's personal contributions. If you like to play catch up, I've had a number of clients that have started with very modest pensions and within just a couple of tax years have ended up with very large pensions and in some cases tax rebates, which they tend to rather like. But alongside that, you have to be a little bit careful because there are limits on the amount that you can contribute, particularly if the contributions are personal contributions. But we've seen an increasing trend for our companies, our clients to incorporate their businesses. So more and more of our business owner clients are operating through limited companies. And that's very good from pensions because from that perspective, it means that they can make potentially much larger contributions than they could personally. And of course, it's a way of reducing their profitability and therefore their corporation tax. It's also a way of extracting value from their business so that they don't run with too much capital in the business, which can of itself be a risk. But you still have to be mindful that there is a limit, and that's what the annual allowance is. It's the maximum amount of pension contribution that an individual can either make or receive, effectively tax-free, in other words, without a penalty. And if they exceed that, then there can be consequences, tax consequences for doing that. And in particular, if they inadvertently have a trigger event, if they do something, if they make some alteration to their pensions or they take some money out of it in the form of income, that can irrevocably impact on the amount of money they can put into their pension, to the extent that it can reduce it from up to £40,000 per tax year to just £4,000. And also all that lovely unused relief that we like to claim for clients, potentially they can lose the lot in one fell swoop. Again, just emphasising why they need to take advice at the appropriate time from somebody who deals with pensions day in, day out. The lifetime allowance, again, that's much misunderstood in that people have this sort of perception that they have to limit the value of their pension funds. And they absolutely don't have to do that. It doesn't affect many people because that lifetime limit is very significant. It's well over £1 million. And indeed, a number of people have got transitional protection, which means their limit is even higher than that. So for the vast majority of people, it's not an issue. And even for those that are lucky enough to have built very large pension funds, it can quite easily be managed with the right advice. But again, understanding it, making sure you have somebody working alongside you, reviewing things for you on a regular basis, will make sure that you don't fall foul of the rules.
Okay, excellent. Well, I think one point that is worth making is that for business owners, running a business can obviously be all-consuming, and I think that finding the time to turn your mind to retirement planning can be a challenge, but also planning to retire at a specific point in time can be very difficult indeed. So how do we ensure that our clients' arrangements are flexible enough to deal with that?
It's a really, really good question. I mean, the reality is a lot of our clients have pension arrangements that do not have the functionality to allow them to take full advantage of the new pension freedoms. And so probably one of the most common jobs we do is updating clients' pension arrangements. Now, some companies do that in any event, others do not. So that data gathering part of the process where we find out exactly what they've got is really important. We can often uncover real horror stories, to be honest. I mean, a not uncommon one is that if the individual dies, their beneficiaries only receive the amount of contributions they paid into their pension. In other words, they lose all of the growth that pension fund has achieved. Another horror story we get quite often is that people haven't updated their nominations. Recently, I had a client who'd been divorced for over 10 years and still had 100% of his pension fund left to his ex-wife, with whom he has no contact, simply because he hadn't had advice, he hadn't updated things, and he'd actually since remarried. And of course, the pension fund doesn't form part of your estate, and therefore you need to deal with it with a separate expression of wish because your will doesn't deal with your pension fund. So there's lots of little subtle nuances that we have to deal with, and there's lots of horror stories that we often uncover when we start looking at people's arrangements. But essentially the starting point is exactly what do they have at the moment, what are they trying to achieve and by when. So sometimes clients are looking to achieve a certain level of income from a specific date. Other times, it's really more just about extracting value from their business as tax efficiently as they can for as long as they can, so that if ultimately their business isn't sold, it's passed on to their children, for example, they have extracted enough value from that business to be able to manage without therefore having to be reliant still on that business. And if they do sell the business for a large sum of money, great, that's a bonus. But if they don't sell it, they've been extracting value along the way very, very tax efficiently, and they have a fund that they can then control and that they can access without restriction. And that's really what appeals to business owners, that ability to control things on the way in, on the way out, and who inherits the pension fund if they die prematurely.
I think it's a very good point, and I think that for a lot of people, they don't necessarily realise that the death benefits are paid at the discretion of the pension trustees. So it can be very difficult for the trustees to know where the pension member would have wanted that money paid unless you actually complete the expression of wish form.
Absolutely, and also some of the older arrangements, the risk is that the pension fund just falls into the estate. And particularly if there's no surviving spouse, you could ultimately have money that suffers inheritance tax needlessly.
Okay, so what sort of pitfalls should business owners look out for when it comes to pensions and retirement planning?
I think one of the most common ones is not making any pension contributions at all, funnily enough. I often, when I talk to our accountancy partners, I say, for goodness sake, make sure your client puts in £100 a year or something into a pension, even if it's a stakeholder pension or a workplace pension. The main reason for this is that carry forward facility that we alluded to earlier, the ability to make up for lost time and claim tax relief in respect of prior tax years that you've missed out on, you don't get that option if you don't make any pension contributions at all. And it's often really quite upsetting that you have to say to clients, look, so you've made absolutely zero pension contributions, but you've now had a fantastic year. You've got really good cash flow. You've got, several £100,000 in your company that you'd like to get out. I'm really sorry. I'm afraid you can't do much about it. You'll have to do it gradually at £40,000 a year. Whereas if they paid £100 into a stakeholder pension 5 years ago, potentially they can pay in £120,000 for prior years and £40,000 for the current year, 160,000 quid in one go, which is obviously very different indeed. So that's a really common pitfall, just not making any pension contributions at all. So general point of advice, make some pension contributions, even if they're only tiny. You might find in a few years' time when your business is doing really well, you'll be jolly glad that you had.
You get out what you put in.
Well, absolutely right. The other one I alluded to is not reviewing your pension death benefit nominations, particularly if you have a new spouse or partner. That is a common mistake that we come across, or more to the point, not nominating your pension death benefits at all. The other one, which again some individual clients do miss, is that if they have transitional protection, which we alluded to earlier, so this is where they've applied to HMRC for an enhanced lifetime allowance, and they have what's called a personal lifetime allowance, which is higher than the standard one, obviously. They can be either 1.25, 1.5 or even up to 1.8 million as a lifetime allowance. If they have fixed protection and they make a pension contribution, however small, they will lose that fixed protection irrevocably. So that's a really, really common mistake. So, sometimes if you're not making pension contributions, you need to get advice. Is there a reason why you're not making pension contributions? And actually sometimes there's a reason, and that's the reason. So again, you need to take advice if you haven't made contributions for some years before you make a contribution, both as to whether you should make any and as to the amount that you should make.
Absolutely. Seek advice before doing anything.
Indeed. And if you get it wrong, you can't change it normally.
That's nearly all we've got time for. Is there any last comment that you would like to make that might be of help to our listeners?
Well, I think really just to reiterate that incorporating a pension as a part of your overall strategy gives you another iron in the fire, another tool in the toolkit. Most business owners, once they get their head around the pension rules, the do's and don'ts, find they are a very, very useful tool that sometimes they wish they'd had for many, many years. That can include, for example, using the pension fund to buy commercial premises from which to operate their own business using a SIP. Just one example. But I think the message really is it is a really useful business tool, and if you've kind of previously closed your mind to the idea of using pensions within your business, maybe you should revisit that.
Excellent. Andrew, thank you very much indeed. If you would like any more information on any of the issues that we've discussed today, please speak to your normal contact at Thomas Westcott or go to our website www.thomaswestcott.co.uk. We would be delighted to hear from you. Thanks for listening.